Alright, it's time to cover Groove on Fight. Okay then, Rakuga Kids, Fighter's Destiny, The Rumblefish, Darkstalkers? Okay, Darkstalkers. In 1994, a bizarre yet innovative fighting game was released into the world. No, not that one. I'm talking about the Darkstalkers series, or Vampire as the series is known in Japan, or Night Warriors, its European title. Look, just use whatever localization floats your boat. Anyway, the series featured rapid combat, immersive backdrops filled with a colorful roster of fighters based upon various mythological creatures and horror staples, and novel gameplay mechanics that eventually trickled down into many other Capcom fighters in the years to follow, as well as other games in the genre. However, it was also plagued by constant rebranding, awkward westernization attempts, and a convoluted, confusing series of arcade releases and home ports, which turned away potential players. Due to the strange chronology of the games, I've decided to refer to the games by their original titles from this point on in order to make things a bit clearer. But I will try to sort out the order of the releases near the end of the episode, so don't get all smug on me and try to call me out as some sort of weeaboo or some other inane stereotype. I'll cover the main series first, which started with Vampire: The Night Warriors. Released in 1994, it was one of the earliest games to be released on Capcom's PlaySystem 2, and made good use of the board's rendering abilities. The sprite work and animation for the characters and backgrounds were far ahead of pretty much every other game out at the time, and they've held up fairly well, more or less. The characters are fairly interesting as well. Despite being placed all over the world, the designs aren't based on exaggerated nationalities, like Capcom's main fighting game series. Rather, they were cherry-picked from different mythologies and legends, ancient, urban, and otherwise, and given more modern interpretations. Granted, some of them were a tad softer and, in some cases, sillier than their origins, but that doesn't really detract from their novelty. The plot wasn't exactly grandiose. It basically boiled down to monsters being monsters and figuring out whether or not to coexist with humans or exert dominance over them. But it was a decent excuse for a fight, which was all most games in the early 90s needed anyway. Because of the detail and small touches put into Vampire, I think that the game had a lot more time and effort invested into it than most of Capcom's other games out at the time, and that effort extended to the gameplay as well. Vampire had a starting roster of 10 characters, a decent number of characters for a first outing, and most of them were distinctive enough to stand out from one another, with their own moves and techniques to use. The game featured 3 levels of Turbo, ranging from level 1, the slowest, to level 3, the fastest, with the differences between the two amounting to fractions of seconds. However, as is the case with most games that used this feature, the highest speed became the standard speed, and the other 2 speeds atrophied in competitive play. Vampire was one of the earliest games to feature air blocking, and cannibalized dashing from some of the more innovative Street Fighter clones, while adding a twist. Like most other games, dashing was performed by double tapping forward or backward, and different characters had different types and kinds of dashes. For example, Dimitri, the titular vampire, could teleport from one point of the screen to another, gaining a sliver of invulnerability from projectiles in the middle of the dash, as well as the ability to attack mid-dash. The not quite as succubus Morrigan, on the other hand, had a speedy diagonal flight pattern that could be used to run around, attack, or cross up the enemy. Most characters had dashes that could be used offensively or defensively, barring those who had no dashes to begin with. Vampire used 6 different attack buttons, and was one of the earliest games, if not the first game, to feature the chain combo. Previous fighting games used moves called links, in which a quick strike could be used after a hit that caused the opponent to stagger back, leading to a combo. Building off of that, the chain combo system allowed the player to reduce or remove the startup time from various normal attacks by performing them in a specific order. By combining small links, players could create longer chains of attacks. The proper order of attacks in Vampire went from light attack to medium and then hard attack. So, for example, pressing the punch buttons from lightest to hardest would cause each attack to come out in that order. The same method applies with the kick buttons, and punches could be chained with kicks as long as it doesn't interfere with the chain. Also, parts of the chain could be skipped, as long as the general order is performed. That is, players can chain medium attacks to hard attacks or light attacks to hard attacks. In addition, light punches and kicks could be chained into each other for as long as they were in range. Range being the operative word. You see, just because a move could be chained in theory, the hits weren't guaranteed. The range and timing of the move had to be considered as well. Although the recovery of a move could be reduced with chains, it was not always removed completely, and it still had to be timed. Also, one thing that sets the chain system in the Vampire series apart from others is that special and super moves cannot be cancelled into from a chain, although the option was still available from a single normal attack. Chaining attacks could be done in the air as well, although not as well as they could be on the ground. Most characters have the ability to link weaker attacks into each other in the air. This could be used to attack or prevent throw attempts while landing from a jump. These links could also be coupled with ground chains for more damage. It's also possible to attack or block at any point in a jump as long as no other actions are being performed. At any time while blocking on the ground, players could perform a reversal attack called the guard cancel, which is performed the moment a strike is blocked. However, only certain moves can be used as guard cancels, and not every character can use the technique. Characters could throw by pressing forward or backward and medium or hard punch or kick. The normal punch throw is usually stationary, while the kick throw, if the character has one, could be used to change sides with the opponent. Most characters actually have command throws in this game. It's not quite universal, since the input, damage, range, and spacing differs from character to character, but it's an interesting fact nonetheless. Projectiles are also used somewhat differently in Vampire than most other fighting games. Rather than traveling across the entire width of the screen, they use momentum to move forward, and after a certain distance they peter out completely. What's interesting about this is that when two projectiles meet, rather than cancelling each other out, the one with the greater momentum will actually push back and overwhelm the weaker projectile. So if one player uses a projectile and the other uses one in response, the latter will push past the former and continue to attack the original user. Of course, this isn't a hard and fast rule. The roster is varied and some projectiles are just built differently than others. Almost every type of attack adds a bit of energy to the special meter at the bottom of the screen. Once that meter fills up, it can be used to power up special moves or for super moves, but the meter is always fading and the rate of depletion increases after the meter is filled. After a few seconds, the meter goes back to zero. It automatically enhances any special move that's used, turning it into an E-special move in the process, so it has to be used carefully. Also, Capcom got a little creative with the special and super motions in this game. Maybe they were still better over the little run-in with Data East, who knows. All I know is that they used all sorts of input motions for the special moves and supers. From quarter circle and dragon punch motions to half circles and inverted hooligan combinations and dragon punches and tap motions and other inputs. They're not all that hard to execute, and unlike other games that try to use alternate input motions, they actually worked when the input was used, which is a miracle in and of itself. Still, even with the advantage of hindsight, I found it to be somewhat jarring. Vampire brought a lot of good stuff along with it. Now for the first game in the series, it was a fantastic effort, especially since this is Capcom we're talking about here. However, as good as the game is, the Fallout blasted it clear out of the water, securing the series' place in the Dead Sea of 90s Token Eater fighters.